Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Look ahead to week 1 of the college football season. But I don't want to do it in the way that you think. I'm not going to sit here and start previewing Georgia, Oregon today. We got Friday show, Wednesday show for that. I don't want to preview, Florida, Utah, Notre Dame, Ohio State, whatever. We got later in the week for that. Instead, what I really want to kind of wrap the show on today is kind of just putting a bow on some stuff from fall camp, right? While week 0 was going on, fall camp was still going on for a significant portion of college football. And on Saturday, we got some closure on some quarterback situations. Now, there's some that are still going on. Ole Miss, as of I record right now, has not named a starter. Same with LSU. But we got pseudo closure at 3 places. Texas A&M has named a starter. Auburn has named a starter, and we're going to discuss them next. But I want to start at Michigan, where our old buddy Jim Harbaugh just pulled a move that I don't know that I have ever seen at the highest levels of college football. Jim Harbaugh on Saturday announced that in week 1, the starting quarterback would be last year's starter, the guy who led them to the college football playoff, Cade McNamara. And then in week 2, Cade McNamara would sit on the bench, at least to start, as his backup, J.J. McCarthy, who is in his second year in the program, kind of a third year because he came in for the spring 2 years ago. He will get the start in week 2, and then from there, Jim Harbaugh will name the permanent starter after week 3. And so I want to talk about it. I want to discuss, because this is one of the more fascinating things I have ever seen. And let me start by doing something that a lot of people don't like to do. I want to go ahead and defend Jim Harbaugh here for half a second, because I do think there's kind of this perception that when you have 2 quarterbacks, you really kind of have none. And so I think the perception is if you can't name a quarterback, it's because neither has separated themselves in a good way, and both those guys probably stink. Well, Jim Harbaugh, first of all, released a statement on Saturday explaining the decision. He said both quarterbacks have played great, done everything they could have, and in every way to win the starting job. Coming out of camp, I just feel like we have 2 quarterbacks, Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy, that we feel very confident we can win a championship with either of those behind center. And so normally if a coach said that after not naming a starter, I would call absolute shenanigans and tomfoolery. I do think there may be something to this, and I do think Michigan may be the rare place where you have 2 really qualified candidates and both cannot separate themselves in a positive way because they're both contributing really well. First of all, Cade McNamara, his resume does in fact speak for itself, right? I don't think at this point you could kind of question his resume. Guy won the Big Ten last year. Guy made the college football playoff last year. Obviously beat Ohio State for the first time in forever last year. And while his skills are not elite, he doesn't have a huge arm. He doesn't have elite speed. He's not crazy accurate, about 64% completion percentage last year. The guy just wins games. And the guy doesn't make mistakes, and he doesn't put you in positions where you're going to lose games, and it's more on the defense and the run game and his skill position guys to make plays. And so Cade McNamara has proven, I can win big games at the college level. Won at Penn State, beat Ohio State, beat Washington, beat, whoever. Won at Wisconsin last year. So Cade McNamara has proven it. But if you follow college football, and even if you listen to this podcast, we talked about it a few times, there was always kind of this lingering thing in the background that his backup, J.J. McCarthy, was actually the guy that was probably the best quarterback on the roster, certainly the most talented, and that it was only a matter of time before this decision gets made. That the decision being that eventually you replace the guy that just won the Big Ten championship with J.J. McCarthy. For people who do not follow, this is a guy, by the way, he made spot appearances here and there. He actually came in the college football playoff against Georgia and played pretty well. But he's an elite athlete, elite speed, makes plays on the run, and he can simply do things that Cade McNamara can't. And so I really do believe that Jim Harbaugh had a tough decision, and I really will be fascinated to see a couple things. One, if he actually makes a decision after week 2. Because the schedule breaks pretty nicely where you get Colorado State to open the season, Hawaii, UConn, the Huskies, yes, they're back on the show. And then in week 4, you get Maryland before The schedule really beefs up, starting with Iowa at Iowa in week 5 to kind of really ramp up the schedule. So one, I'm just curious if the decision actually gets made after week 2 or if it extends. But what I would also say is I'm curious if one clearly establishes themselves once the games actually get played. Because there is the possibility, certainly, that both are super elite and it is impossible to decide between the two of them. But the more that I thought about it, I made a few phone calls over the weekend, something did strike me. There is a possibility that one is better and that Jim Harbaugh is doing the politically correct thing by giving both of them a shot. The first, you look at it from the from the Cade McNamara perspective, I could see the scenario where Cade McNamara is very much the better quarterback and you're trying to keep J.J. McCarthy happy and in the program. I hate to say it, we're all fans of somebody. Whether you're an Alabama fan, a Georgia fan, a UConn fan, a Texas fan, a Washington fan, a Colorado fan, whatever. This is the new world of college football that we live in. And as I think about this situation, I do think it's possible that, as I said, there could be a scenario where Cade McNamara is simply the better quarterback, won you the Big Ten, but you want to keep J.J. McCarthy in your program as long as you can. And if you name Cade McNamara the starter, there's a possibility that J.J. McCarthy hits the portal and leaves, and that's simply not something that you want if you're Jim Harbaugh. I think it's possible. I think you want to keep him around. I think with the schedule, the way that it is, you can potentially do that. And then, oh, by the way, maybe he does get better. Maybe he does win the job. Or obviously, in a worst-case scenario and something that nobody wishes for, there's always the possibility that an injury happens that you end up needing him. So I do think that's a possibility, and I do think by week 2, week 3, Cade McNamara could clearly establish he's the better guy and win the job. But what I would also say, something struck me as I thought about this whole situation over the last couple of days. What I was thinking was this, is I certainly think there's the possibility that Cade McNamara is simply the better quarterback, and this is a formality, just giving both a chance under the public eye. What I was also thinking, though, was sort of something I talked about with Stetson Bennett, the quarterback at Georgia. Remember I talked about what if Stetson Bennett isn't good? What if you know you have somebody better? Remember, this was a guy, Stetson Bennett, that was questioned into the college football playoff last year and into the title game over whether he could win you a title or not. Well, what happens if he loses a game? What happens if he loses 2 games? Blah, 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 blah. This isn't a Georgia conversation. But I was also thinking about it from the Michigan perspective as well. As I told you, Cade McNamara, really talented but limited upside, and he kind of is what he is. And my other thought with this possibility was, there is the possibility that Cade McNamara is simply better and they're trying to keep J.J. McCarthy around because of the transfer possibility. I think the exact opposite could be true as well. Is that if you're Jim Harbaugh, you're coming off the best season in recent program history, certainly the best season since you've been there, but you know that the best quarterback on your roster was not playing last year. But you can't bench a guy that just started and won you a Big Ten championship, that beat Ohio State, and that got you to the college football playoff. So what you're going to do is just basically make this a public spectacle, where Cade McNamara gets all the reps in week 1, J.J. McCarthy gets all the reps in week 2, and maybe there's a possibility that J.J. McCarthy is so good, the public then sees it, and then it takes the pressure off of Jim Harbaugh to actually bench the starter from the college football playoff run. I'm not saying that's what is happening. I have no sourcing on that specific element of it, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that J.J. McCarthy is simply the better quarterback, but Jim Harbaugh feels like he owes it to the other quarterback that led him to a college football playoff, and he's going to start Cade McNamara in week 1. Then the J.J. McCarthy show begins, and then from there, it becomes pretty obvious who the best quarterback is, and then he can go to the public and say, look, y'all saw it with your own 2 eyes. Y'all saw who the best quarterback was, and we're going to go ahead with J.J. McCarthy going forward. Like I said, absolutely fascinating to think about. And my last little thought is, I wouldn't be surprised, as I said, if this extends beyond week 2. UConn at home in week 3. You got to get ready for those Huskies. But then also Maryland in week 4 sets Michigan up to be 4-0 going into Iowa the first week of October. Really quick, couple other quarterback decisions got made. Texas A&M names Haynes King the starting quarterback. Haynes King, of course, was the starter, won the job this time last year over Zach Calzada. Unfortunately, he goes down literally the second game of the season, early in that game, and we never got to see him. Was out for the rest of the year with an ankle injury, does come back and does reclaim this spot at Texas A&M. Ultimately, I don't know that I'm all that surprised, right? one thing I don't try to do on this show, as we've discussed many times, I don't claim to be some X's and O's expert, okay? But you talk to anybody in football, you listen to any of these broadcasts, any of these analysts that are around Texas A&M or the SEC, they tell you Jimbo Fisher's playbook is complicated, it's not easy to pick up, and so it's not surprising to me that a guy that is entering his third year in the program has a leg up on two guys that just got there in the spring. For people who do not know, Max Johnson, transfer from LSU, Connor Wegman, a true freshman, were in the running as well for the job. And so to me, this isn't all that surprising. Haynes King probably has the best command of the offense. I'm not saying anybody wishes for injury, but sometimes not playing even allows you to have a better grasp of it, sitting back with a headset, with the coaching staff, watching the backup last year. So I'm not really surprised by this. I guess the only thing that I would say is it'll be interesting to see going forward, because I could see the scenario next year at Texas A&M where it's exactly what I just talked about at Michigan. Haynes King is an elite athlete, like literally outside of Devin Achane, who's a world-class sprinter, their star running back. Haynes King is like the second fastest guy on the team, like 4.3, 40, handheld time. And so what's interesting about him is, though, he hasn't proven that he can do it as a quarterback. And so I only bring it up because I could see the scenario where this time next year, Connor Wegman, the true freshman, is clearly in position to take the job. Haynes King has to go out and prove it, but Haynes King has been named the starter at Texas A&M. And then finally, Auburn. So Auburn kind of made a very similar decision, right? Auburn had two transfers come in this offseason. Ironically, one of them, Zach Calzada, I just mentioned, came from Texas A&M. Robbie Ashford, a backup from Oregon, who actually played very well in the spring game, transferred in as well. But it is TJ Finley, who won the job late last year, that won the job this year as well. Now, I'm not really a huge TJ Finley guy. I'll be blunt. 54% completion percentage last year, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. But what it says to me is kind of what it says about Texas A&M. I think we as fans get so enamored with the transfer portal stuff, and I include myself. I'm not sitting here saying that it's just fans and message boards and this and that. I think we as fans get enamored with all of these transfers, and what you forget is a guy is showing up in spring, he's showing up in summer, and he sometimes is a year or two behind the guys that have already been there. And so you look at what's going on at, say, Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a perfect example. They bring in Jackson Dart, highly recruited player, ended up at USC, transfers to Ole Miss. But they had a guy who had been there, Luke Altmaier, who's been pretty good, who played in big games last year, and we're just handing the job to Jackson Dart. And I think it's kind of the same at Auburn, is everybody always wants what's next, but it's clear that TJ Finley has the best grasp of the offense. Big kid, super athletic, tough, by all accounts a great leader. We'll see what happens with TJ Finley, but to me, not surprised by this one at all. This is where it had been trending, and it appears as though this one is in the books. TJ Finley will be your starting quarterback for Auburn in Week 1. And Auburn's an interesting deal, much like Michigan, where the schedule is very interesting early. They have some tough games early, but I think I've mentioned this on the show. First 5 games are all at home. Mercer this weekend, San Jose State in Week 2, then the big one, Auburn hosting Penn State, Missouri, and then they play LSU the first week of October. So listen, if Brian Harsin's going to keep his job, the schedule breaks about as nicely as possible because he does get his first 5 at home, even though 2 of those teams are pretty tough, Penn State and LSU.